understanding what our consumers want and need is of paramount importance. How do we get faster, deeper insights into what our consumers are thinking? And then how do we feed into our processes so that we can ensure that we're making the right products on the right shelf? This is all about how we align more with the consumer.
Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is John Gigerich. John is the Chief Information Officer of Keurig Dr Pepper, a roughly $15 billion revenue beverage company. He joined Keurig a little less than 7 years ago, just prior to its acquisition of Dr Pepper a bit more than 6 years ago. His early days were spent on the integration of the two companies while modernizing its tech landscape. His latest strategy has his team focused on digital consumer connections, digital value chains, the digitized enterprise, all while setting a digital foundation for the company. I look forward to learning more about what each entails through this conversation. John, welcome to Technovation. It's great to speak with you today.
Thanks, Peter. Happy to be here.
Well, John, I thought we would begin with your company. You are the Chief Information Officer of Keurig Dr Pepper. I think most people who are listening know probably of Keurig, certainly of Dr Pepper. Some may not realize the union between the two, however. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, as someone who joined prior to the union, was very much involved in the integration of the two. Talk a bit about your business, if you would.
Sure, happy to. So, Peter, we are a complete beverage company. We are about $15 billion in revenue. We have 28,000 employees who work across three big segments of our business: U.S. refreshing beverage, which aligns to the Dr Pepper, but it's also waters, energy drinks, flavored waters; U.S. coffee, which is the Keurig segment; and then international. And on the international side, both sets of products play on the international side. And supporting all that, we have about 30 factories across our geographies and about 150 distribution centers and warehouses that help us to drive that business and get product on shelf for consumers. One exciting fact for us is that we actually have 45 million households now who have Keurig brewers in their households. And that is a thing that we continue to strive for, is more household penetration on the Keurig brewers. And we think it's a very exciting business. If you go to any retail establishment where they're selling food or beverage, odds are you're going to run across some of our products when you're in those stores, or restaurants, hotels, you name it, on an airplane. We're kind of everywhere.
And you enlightened me. I hadn't realized that of the major soda brands, this is the oldest. Can you just enlighten the audience for that, for others who may be surprised by that fact?
Right. So yes, Dr Pepper, the formulation for Dr Pepper was actually perfected in Waco, Texas, back in 1885. And so we have the distinction of the big three soda brands. We are the oldest as a result of that. We actually have a brand that's even older than that. Our Schweppes tonic actually came on the market originally in 1783. So it's 241. If I do the math right in my head, it's about 241 years. We're very excited about that. And, obviously the company has morphed a lot over that time. If you'll indulge me a little bit, I'll tell you a little bit about how we've gotten to where we are. Because as you said, most people know Dr Pepper, or they know Keurig. And then when I certainly, when I meet people, they're like, I didn't realize they were together. And so how this has evolved over time: Dr Pepper Snapple Group was formed in the early 2000s through a number of there was industry consolidation going on at that time. It became a thing then. On the coffee side of the house, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters kicked off in the 1980s and was growing rather rapidly in New England. Along came Keurig in the 90s as a startup. So they were separate entities that just happened to be in the same general geography as one another. And then in 2006, Green Mountain purchased Keurig. And so there was a synergistic relationship. Keurig was looking for brands of coffee to run through the machines. And of course, Green Mountain was looking for ways to sell more coffee. And that was the genesis of Keurig Green Mountain. And then in 2018, a deal was struck where we merged the two companies together. And that's what formed Keurig Dr Pepper as you know it today.
I'm glad you provided that context. Very, very helpful. And it brings us to the next topic that I wanted to speak with you about. You are the Chief Information Officer, as I mentioned, for a little bit more than 6 years now, but you actually joined Keurig pre-deal. At least you accepted the offer and were expecting to to join only one side of what is now the company. Talk a bit about the, accepting the offer, starting the company, and the pathway into the combination, if you would.
Sure. So yes, as you said, I started just before the deal. So I had got my job offer and had given my notice at my prior employer. I used to work for Kellogg's prior to this. And in late January of 2018, all of a sudden there was a big announcement. I was in my notice period still that Keurig and Dr. Pepper were merging. And so I joined in February. So from February to July, I was technically just covering Keurig because there was obviously an existing CIO covering Dr. Pepper as we prepared for the deal to close, which happened in early July of 2018. And then I took over the whole thing. When we brought the companies together, as any big merger like this, there was loads to do, from what may seem mundane, like getting everybody an email address, but can be very challenging, as many of your listeners will know. It's like we're merging AD environments and we're merging email systems, and each company had its own set of rules. We're finding where are the gaps in the infrastructure, some of the basics like that, all the way to how do we accelerate the growth of this company and make the company grow faster. And so very much the first few years were just a lot of hard yards on getting more resilient on the infrastructure. Cybersecurity became a huge area for us. Just general controls, again, because when we merged, Keurig was a private company, previously had been public, but it was private at the time of the deal. Dr. Pepper was public. And so with all the SOX compliance stuff, there was just, again, like I said, none of that's sexy. It's like, I always equate it to a few years back, we live in a very old house, 140-year-old house. We had to replace the sewer line to the street. And it was it was expensive. No one's going to pay us a nickel more for our house because we have a new sewer line. So having infrastructure that doesn't go down, and cybersecurity that's bulletproof, no one pays extra for that. They just expect you to have that. So we had to get that. We had to merge, we had to get to one HR. We had to get to one payroll, timekeeping, and financials and all these things. So we went through all that. That really took the first several years. In the background, we started working on where do we go from a digital transformation standpoint? Since we're making all these changes, are there opportunities for us to not have to redo some of this stuff down the line? And so, as an example, both companies had outsourced much of their operational activity around IT. So they were both in colo facilities. Those contracts were coming due. We chose, rather than picking another colo, let's move things to the cloud. And so we picked things up. We moved, it was a lift and shift, picked them up, moved them to Google Cloud or moved them to Azure, which we now have gone back and tried to optimize those more because just moving them over obviously is not a recipe for us to get a better price. Actually, it's going to cost us more in this circumstance. But we did a number of things like that. When we redid the network, we did SD-WAN. We did not stick with MPLS and Centerpoint, a star topology. We went to SD-WAN so that we had this more dynamic network that had more resiliency baked into it, and which is helping us now as we get more serious about, I'll call it the front end of digital versus the back end of digital. And so, but yes, it's been an exciting journey.
And fast forwarding to today, John, talk a bit about your purview. You've alluded to some of the things you worked on, and by extension, one might have a sense in mind as a result of that of areas of focus. But if you could put a pinpoint into each of the areas that are in your span of command, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. So our team has responsibility for all of the corporate applications across KDP. We have responsibility for all of the infrastructure, cybersecurity. We are responsible for the SOX controls associated with all of those and ensuring that we're in compliance in all those spaces. So the way we've divided up our team today is I have three separate leaders that cover different domains across the application space. I have a leader on my team who is our CISO, who handles all the cybersecurity and controls, but he also has responsibility and accountability for all of the infrastructure side of things, which we refer to infrastructure in our space as technology services. And then I have I don't want to call him chief of staff because I think that underplays what Scott does for me. He has all the PMO, our finances, our planning, strategy into things. IT procurement rolls up to him. We have a separate procurement team from the core corporate procurement team. So we handle everything. We do have a segment of our business, which is direct to consumer on the coffee side of things. And just want to be clear that there is a separate team in the business that does the front end for that, but we have accountability for the entire back end for our direct to consumer e-commerce business, as well as, again, all this. We need one person in charge of security, and we handle that across everything, including the OT world as well.
Very helpful. Thank you for that context.
Yep.
Earlier this year, you set about what you refer to as digital ambitions, and you're in the process of enacting each of those. And I thought we might take a little time to talk about each of the areas that you articulated. The first of those is digital consumer connections. Talk a bit about what's intended by that, and of course, some examples of what you and the team are driving forward.
Yeah. So being in a consumer products business, understanding what our consumers want and need is of paramount importance. And so, the name itself, digital consumer connections, kind of says it all. This is where we have to, how do we get faster, deeper insights into what our consumers are thinking? How do we reach them better from a marketing perspective so that they're aware of what we're offering? And then how do we feed into our processes so that we can ensure that we're making the right products, we're having those products on the right shelf somewhere, right? Because we can't just say every shelf gets the same product set, because the consumers in different parts of the country, whether they're in Canada, whether they're in Mexico or the US, obviously have very different tastes. And so this is all about how we align more with the consumer. If we talk about like where we've been going over the last 12 months, we're really proud of a project that we kicked off last year that actually went live earlier this year, which is looking at our marketing mix and how do we optimize our marketing mix. So this is about where we buy ads, the ads we buy, for which products, where we're placing those. And this is helping us to better target that, which then leads us to hopefully having better results from a top line perspective, which obviously leads to more profitability at the back end. But ultimately, it is about those consumers and making sure, the last thing we want is for someone to turn up at their local store and go, I really want this, and then walk to the shelf and go, gosh, it doesn't look like worst would be that they don't carry it, but equally bad would be it's not on shelf when I want it. And so this is all about making sure that we have that capability to have the product there when the consumer has the need for it.
There's a lot you articulated there that is of great interest, John. What are the means of connecting? Like, what are some of the tools that you use or the analysis you do to collect what you've described, whether it's differences in tastes regionally or across different countries? Of course, there's a supply chain and an inventory aspect to what you're describing as well.
Sure.
Talk a bit about how you make that real, if you would.
Sure. So we have multiple streams of data that we generate ourselves from activities of our business. Then we also have data that is coming from consumers. As I mentioned earlier, we have this direct to consumer business, which is fairly substantial. And so we have a lot of first party data that comes off of that. We also have a program that's called Pepper Perks, which is a loyalty program around Dr. Pepper. Again, great source of first party data. And then more recently, we're starting to get more data from our retailers. And so when we start to go through the data, getting it in our data lake, getting it in our data products, and then being able to do analytics against that, that's how we start to get the insights. But there's also a whole insights team that's part of marketing that also does a bunch of heavy lifting, where it's actual interviews and focus groups and things like that. But all that data starts to filter into our processes, and then that allows us to gain those deeper insights of our consumers.
Again, a great overview. I appreciate that. So the next area that you described among those digital ambitions is digital value chain. Can you talk about, define the term, if you would, and again, provide some context as to what it means?
The context for us here on value chain is really all about the work that we do to get the product made, sold, shipped, on shelf, in the consumer's hands, really. So if you started thinking about the groups across KDP that are involved in those activities, so the entire supply chain space, the entire go-to-market team that is part of the sales organization. So this is field sales. What are we putting in the hands of the account manager when they're in the store taking an order? I'll digress just for a second here. We have two parts to our business. So on the refreshing beverage side, there is a big segment which is called direct store delivery that we execute against, where we have reps going into the store, taking orders, our trucks deliver it there, our merchandisers put it on shelf. That's all part of this value chain here. And then we have another segment where we sell to a large retailer, and it goes to that retailer's warehouse, and then the retailer distributes it out to their stores. So on the soda side, the big three soda vendors, us, Coke, Pepsi, all follow this DSD framework and soda. That's how the grocery stores, the retailers want that to happen. And so what we put in the hands of the salespeople in the field becomes very important. And so today they carry a tablet using an application that was actually built several years back, custom by the Dr. Pepper team. This was actually prior to the merger. And we've layered on more technology on top of that. And I think we're going to see that evolve over time. We could see us retool that completely. And we don't know yet whether do we build it again ourselves? Do we leverage an off-the-shelf solution like a Salesforce or something like that? Those all remain to be seen where we go next with that. But that kind of gives you a context. We're doing a ton of work. Where we're making probably the most progress right now on the digital value chain is really in the supply chain space. So we've had a number of efforts there over the last several years. We've also made huge investments on the physical plant side of supply chain since the merger. We've opened several new factories. We've retooled some existing factories. We've retooled some distribution centers. But our big project right now is around end-to-end planning. And so that's been underway for 6-7 months. And that, as many of your listeners will know, that's a multi-year process. So we have multiple, like going live with a segment of that this year, going live with another segment the first half of next, and so on and so forth until we cover all the planning domains. But this is where we need to make that value chain as efficient as possible and keep our cost under control. And what we're looking for here is how do we gain an advantage, with the technology side of things. And that's really the focus with the digital on this.
Yeah, very interesting. And certainly see even some of the connections with the first topic as well, how bringing life to this in some ways also renders the other efficient. I recognize the crossover in some of that.
Yeah.
Talk a bit about digitized enterprise, a third area that you articulated as part of this plan.
Yeah. So digitizing the enterprise, this is how do we leverage technology to improve productivity and large swipe productivity across the organization. In addition to thinking of a lot more than we have in the past about what is the digital employee experience here too. So I think it's been very common over the years for when we put in a new tool to really focus on the user experience of that specific tool, whether this is a packaged solution, SaaS solution, custom developed. We want to optimize that to the greatest extent possible. And generally, when you're buying a package or a SaaS solution, they're generally pretty well thought out from a UX perspective. But the miss for us, I think, as CIOs has been, how does it interact? What's the interaction? What's the life of that employee who's using it? How many of these different user experiences do they have to have on a daily basis? And how complicated is their job as a result of that? And I think it's something for us in the last couple of years, we've really started to think about how do we make life easier for the employee so that they're not having to go to 10 different systems to complete their job? Are there certain things that we could consolidate and, almost build a front end in front of some of this? And so what we're going to see here is things like that. We're going to see using what we term intelligent automation. So that the whole RPA, low code, no code, Gen AI, how do we improve processes, take the friction out of the processes? Do we need to do transformation of the process? Just automating things isn't the answer. If I have a terrible process and I automate it, I can do the terrible process faster, which may be a small win, but it's not the ultimate win. We've made some real progress here over the last year. Like most companies, in 23, we started looking in earnest at Gen AI. We got a policy set across the organization and started going down the path of like, okay, what are the use cases? And, again, your listeners, I know many of them have probably experienced the same thing. It seemed that every consultant in the world knocked on the door and was like, I have ideas for use cases. And remarkably, they were all very similar, but we already had our own things in mind. And so we were able to progress from POC to actually having some things in production now that have actually returned value for us. We've learned a tremendous amount. We learned, for one thing, we have to have scale for the final solution. It's easy to justify the POC, but when you start going, I have to make this industrial strength so that it's not security vulnerable, that it's not going to fall over on a whim, it gets more expensive. And in order to do that, you have to have a business case. And if I'm doing something for 2 people, it's hard to find a business case. If I'm affecting 400 people, obviously I have a business case then. I'm saving them time. So we actually implemented a tool for our consumer care organization. It's a knowledge search tool that brings up, so when they're taking calls from consumers, it allows them to answer the question faster. We saw like a 15% reduction in call time, average call handle time, which again, when you start talking hundreds of people across 1 million plus calls, that's material and actually makes a beneficial difference. So we're continuing to move forward at pace with the intelligent automation, and we have a team dedicated to that. We've got some outside help while we think about how we're going to staff that long term, but we see that as a real value add that's going to continue chugging along in the future.
Fascinating. Great to hear more about where value is already being garnered as you implement these ideas.
Yes.
As an undergirder to the 3 topics you've just described, you noted a digital foundation, or I should say digital foundations. And
Yes.
I'm already hearing some of the representation of that in some of
Yes.
your responses, but wanted to make sure that we were circling back to it to
Sure.
cover it a bit more comprehensively, if you would.
Yeah. And I'll try to be brief here because there's 5 of them. And I think, again, for most listeners, these won't be big surprises. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So the first is really cloud first. And I already mentioned that a little bit with the talk about the merger, post-merger, where we opted, rather than sticking with what we had, which was more colo, what could go directly to cloud. We do still have a small segment, by the way, that's in colo because it was not capable. We're not capable of moving into the cloud. Too old, or wrong database, wrong operating system, whatever the case might be, that we're still going to work through. But as what we made a decision on was, we're going to stop adding to the debt that needs to be remedied later. So in that was, we're going with SaaS solutions if we're buying a package. If it is something that we're building, it's going to be cloud-based. If it's an on-prem solution, it's going to be cloud-based. It's going to run in one of our cloud providers. And this way, we're already there. It's also led to us building a FinOps practice around all that as well. That's something that we've kicked in the last 18 months. And as I mentioned earlier, our initial move to the cloud was a lift and shift. And so that's really helped us to reduce our spend by substantial amounts. And I would recommend that to anyone who doesn't have FinOps team working on their cloud spend. Absolutely something they should be doing going forward. So cloud is the first one. The second one is being data-driven. This is, to me, motherhood and apple pie. So in the sense of, data is the oil that lubricates everything in the business. And so having an ability to access our data when and where needed, that we have one version of the truth to the greatest extent possible, that's still something we're working through, because we've all experienced those meetings in our careers where you're in a meeting and things are presented and the debate is about whether the data is right versus what are the actions we're going to take against the data. And so our team is really focused on, how do we ensure that we're getting there with this? Everyone has trust in that data, that they know that it's right. The debate is about actions to be taken, not whether the quality of the data. And we're doing a bunch of things here. So we're retooling, we're transforming our entire master data setup. That's been in process for nearly a year now, making some great progress there. As many people will know, that is not a light switch kind of change to transform your master data. That is a long haul kind of project, multi-year, and in nature. And we're going through that process as we speak. And then we're also moving to a data product-based architecture for our data so that we have more accessibility to that data for more of our teams across KDP. The third one is about the right talent. So I mentioned that we had outsourced the operations, that was at colos. Over the last 2 decades, both companies had, prior to my arrival, had outsourced most of the activity that was done in IT, to where we have quite a, not a huge team of badged employees. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of contractors. And so one of the things we're looking at is, where do we need to have KDP badged people? We're not talking a wholesale insourcing of all the talent. What we are talking about is that we are going to build teams where we can derive excess value by having that person with a KDP badge, so that the knowledge stays with us, because when the project's over, the consultant or contractor leaves and the knowledge that was built during the project leaves with them. And there are many areas where we would benefit from having that in-house. And so that is about finding the spots for that. It's also about helping our existing staff to gather the skills necessary to work in the new world, which is going to be, which is the next one, which is around agile. And it's really how do we go from a very waterfall world, again, not uncommon, like for most companies of our size and scale. And we've been going through a process for the last two plus years now, and we're accelerating that change as we go into 25. And I suspect by the end of 25, all the areas that we can do in an agile fashion will be running in agile, and we will be running product teams. Whether we're using agile techniques or not, we're going to use a product management model to drive the activity across. And then finally is ROI focused. And that's probably a self-explanatory one. We're a growing business. There's a lot of competition for capital, dollars on an annual basis. Just came from one of those meetings here planning for 2025 a few minutes prior to this call. And we need to make sure that the projects we're delivering can compete with those that are directly tied to the growth of our business. And that's really what we're looking to do, is accelerate the growth of our business through the digital transformation. And so it's about what we think the value will be up front, and then how do we do the value management on the back end to ensure that we actually captured it, not just immediately after, but a year after, 2 years after. Is the value holding? Because we've built that ROI based on an expectation that it's going to be spread out over that time.
Yeah, a great overview, John. Thank you. I want to stick on that last point, the ROI focus, for a moment longer. I think it's really interesting, and what a great custodians you and your team are to the limited capital that any organization has, to think about it in that way. And yet it's not been that, not that long ago, there were relatively few, and still even today, there are many that do not think about ROI contribution from IT in the way as formally as you clearly do. And I wonder, as you contemplate that, what are some of the mechanisms that you use in order to keep your team on track? Obviously, there's plenty that you do, like cybersecurity, which is not an ROI, more like insurance in some ways. But talk a bit about the way in which you factor that into your planning.
Right. No, it's a great question, Peter. And I think it's something that has evolved over time, and I would say is still evolving. So first and foremost it is a very strong partnership with the business unit or function that we're working with to propose the project. So, and the way we're set up as a business, there's a finance lead for, I have a finance lead for IT. There's a finance lead in supply chain or for US Refreshing Beverage. And we work hand in hand with them to say, look, this is where we think the value is on this project. This is the stream that's going to happen. We get down in the weeds on this stuff. Like, here's the depreciation arc. Here's the ongoing cost arc. Here's where, and it is, sometimes it can be a little bit of a wrestling match of agreeing. But before we kick the project off, before we agree, we have a gate review process. Before we go to gate to get this thing approved, we are aligned hand in hand to where, when it gets presented at gate, it's not even my team presenting it at gate. It's a business leader presenting it at gate. And it's something that I started to institute when I first got here. I'm like, well, why are we presenting that? the team over here is going to get the value from this. They're the ones who have to say, yes, I'm going to take that cost out, or yes, the revenue is going to go up by that amount. And so it's without fail. In fact, we had our gate review early this morning, and my team was there to support. We actually had to answer some questions about the project and why there was certain timing of the cost, but the business leader, the vice president covering that area, actually presented it for the gate review. And I think that's been a huge win for us as far as getting the project started. And then I think the back end, I'll be honest, our value tracking on the back end is very robust when it's a cost save, because it's easy. I can look at a cost center and was the cost center decremented by that amount. When it is a growth related value proposition, that's much harder to prove and much harder to track. And so again, like I said at the outset, I think it's an evolution that we expect will happen over time with it.
And yet, I mean, phenomenal that you're making it so clear by appearing in your strategic documents and communications that these are going to be areas of focus for the organization. No doubt that's something that ensures that this is part of the culture, part of the means of operation. So kudos to you for framing it that way. I wanted to ask you, John, with all the reflection that you do about the future and when you contemplate the foundation that you've laid, what are some trends that excite you as you look forward, as you are planning for the year ahead or even thinking about years ahead that particularly excite you that you would underscore here?
I think the thing that really excites me, it's going to sound funny, data excites me. And where things are going relative to data is very, very exciting to me. I think I think I feel like I can only speak to KDP. I feel like we've just scratched the surface of how we can use data to dramatically improve our operations. And so the technologies around that, and this would include things, Gen AI, broader AI, ML, all those things I think are going, the next 5 years, I feel like are going to be just a wild ride in those spaces. And I think that because there's again, there's that gold rush mentality, I guess, right now around AI that we've seen with companies form. How many companies are there now with a .ai extension after their name? And so how these all sort out. I'm fortunate enough, I guess, my career has spanned where I was around for the first .com boom. and watched that. I actually participated in that. My brother and I had a company that we participated in that, and this feels similar to that. And so that's why I say I'm excited about data, because I kind of lump that in there. The intelligent automation lumps in with data as well. So I think that space is going to evolve really fast, and I think it's going to be an opportunity for us as CIOs to really make material, measurable differences to how our businesses operate and help accelerate their growth as things go forward.
And how do we talked a bit about some of the talent aspects of all that you described before. As you think about leveraging data and the people who will do so, whether internally or some folks outside of the organization, partner organizations of various kinds, how do you think about its evolution? How do you keep pace with where data is going to make sure that you can continue to derive value from it?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been working toward, Peter, this is more of a practical solution, is we're hoping in 25 to stand up a data marketplace inside KDP. And so the idea behind this is so that people can self-serve on this. And so in order to do that, it's more than just standing up the technology. We have, we call it Data Uncapped University that we've started, so we have a bunch of online courses so that it's a nascent stage right now. We've had 25 people go through it. But our intention is to have a certification process for people to then be able to self-serve, because as I referenced earlier on intelligent automation, we need scale. Well, if somebody could self-serve and they're going to do something that could help 2 or 3 people, we want them to be able to do that. So setting up the marketplace, setting up the university is going to enable that to start to happen. So that's how we're going to accelerate the use of data. I think, how do we keep current on that? Ooh, that's a big question. I don't know that I have a great answer for that, but I think part of how I try to stay current is, give you a plug. Listening to your podcast, obviously, I'm involved with several networking groups across the IT space, and I really find the greatest advantage for me is when I get to spend time with other CIOs, and I don't mean listening to the same presenter. I mean actually sitting with them and talking about problems, and or having dinner with them, and we're, there's so many of the challenges we face are common across all of our organizations. And so it's like, oh, they're facing the same thing, because frankly, it can be a lonely job. And in those groups, I've been able to do a better job. But it's reading, it's listening to podcasts, and it's networking are the keys for me.
Phenomenal. And what a great answer that is, I think, John, to make sure that you are at a time of such dynamism that you're tapping into networks you have, your broader ecosystem for insights as to how the world looks in places that are similar to yours or dissimilar, that you might translate into some interesting ways back into an operation like your own. That's a great insight. Well,
Yeah.
you already started to mention some of the things that you listen to and read. Thank you so much for your kind words about this very podcast. I'm so glad that you are part of that content now, of course. Yes. Are there other resources, things you've been reading, things you've been listening to, things you've been watching that you would recommend to others?
Yeah, I most recently I just started a new book called Future Ready: The 4 Pathways to Capturing Digital Value, and I'm only partway through it at this point, but it's excellent. Mentioned to you earlier, I had an opportunity to meet Peter Weil recently, and for those that don't know, he runs a program at MIT, and just really enjoy his thinking and how he approaches problem solving. And I found the book to be really fascinating and challenging, in the sense of it's causing me to go, I probably need to think a little differently about some of the and so I like that about I don't necessarily want to read something to just affirm my point of view. I want to challenge my point of view where possible. And thus far, the book is challenging me a bit on my point of view, which I think is a win for me.
A great response. And I by coincidence, a recent interviewee, episode 909, is with Peter Weil, and some great insights from his latest research, including the book itself, though please, folks should go out and read it as well. Well, John, thank you so much for a great conversation. What a pleasure it's been to hear more about the consequential term and that has been your time, both predating the merger between Keurig and Dr Pepper, and now very consequentially in the 6 years since the merger. Remarkable story to tell, and it sounds like an exciting future from where you sit as well.
Great. Thank you, Peter. I appreciate it. It was great.